Hi, a very good afternoon for everyone. Thank you for waiting for a couple of minutes while the rest of our attendees join in. So, my name is Dominic, and I just wanted to welcome everyone to our Instant Insights webinar on market trends in Singapore. So, I guess we're all here today because we're keen to find out how the Singapore flex market is doing. And in today's webinar, we'll actually be looking at what our instant insights and data is showing about the flex market, and as well how we can use this data, whether we are in the space as a flexible workspace provider or as a broker to run more efficient sales and marketing, as well as operations with clear and measurable results. So my name is Dominic. I'm from the Cowork Intel team, and I'm currently focusing on the Singapore and Hong Kong market. And today we are joined by two distinguished guests, James Rankin as well as Lawrence Edwards. So let me just give some time to introduce the both of them. So James Rankin is the head of research and insight at Instant. He has led the research team for the last 6 years and specializes in using instant and industry data to bring clarity to the flexible workspace market, helping operators of space, asset owners, and investors to understand market trends and identify areas of opportunities and risk. And Lawrence Edwards is the head of sales for Cowork Intel, which is part of the Instant Group. So as part of the partnerships team, Lawrence drives the growth and user adoption of our innovative data and insights platform, Cowork Intel, to increase data transparency across the global flexible workspace industry. So before we pass it over to James to start off with an overview of the Singapore market, I just wanted to share with everyone here on board that feel free along the way, if you have any questions or comments about the information that we'll be sharing, you can actually use the Q&A tab on the Zoom webinar to put in any questions that you might have, and we'll be sure to address them along the way or at the end of the webinar. Yeah, if not, without further ado, let's welcome James Rankin to share with us more about the Singapore flex market. James, over to you.
Thanks, Dominic. Great. Yeah, if we can go on to the next page. So thank you very much for joining today's session. I think in a market that continues to become very competitive, making an informed decision when it comes to sort of asset performance or location opportunity assessment or even underwriting the asset is only becoming more vital. And that's certainly what we've seen across Europe, the Americas, and starting to see it across APAC. Within the flexible workspace world, getting clarity on, I think, market data from a data perspective has always been quite challenging. You know, they're in informal groups, there's mystery shopping, and those have tended to be the main routes for information. I think serving a purpose, certainly, but probably not the best approach if you compare that to other industries. And certainly, if you're going to use that information in sort of in a financial way, whether that's pulling together business plans or looking for investment, those can often be challenged. So Instant has increasingly sort of strived to provide some clarity, but we recognise we've always maintained a letterbox view, the instant view of the industry, which has been fantastic. But again, we recognise that there's more, and we've therefore taken that decision to work with the industry, with people like yourselves, to introduce a combined approach that we hope will improve the ability to make informed decisions and ultimately increase investment into the industry, supporting a smarter working world. So today, I wanted to briefly share some of the trends that we're seeing within your market, within Singapore, both at a very high level, some of the primary research we've done early this year, and also the data sets that we have within the business, before passing over to Lawrence and the Cowork Intel team, who can give you more detail on what's happening within Singapore and the platform itself, that's ultimately been built to support you as operators and landlords working within the industry. So if we can move on to the next page, I think looking towards the future remains quite important, particularly given how many companies continue to try and adapt their workspace portfolios to sort of new office strategies, many of which are still in progress. And across Singapore, I think the demand for flexible space it's actually one of the few markets where we saw limited declines from a demand perspective during the pandemic. In fact, in 2020, we saw actually a slight rise compared to 2019. While in most other major cities, markets saw contractions of up to 50% during the pandemic, certainly within our data. And I think despite quite severe restrictions within Singapore, the interest in flexible space remained high, certainly from new entrants. And this was primarily thanks to new occupiers exploring the market, or those that really hadn't considered flexible space as an option before. It's worth noting that demand such as this does not always translate into transactions. And I think that was certainly the case during 2020 and 2021. Instead, we saw what we saw in Singapore was occupiers sort of exploring what was available and the types of costs. And in many cases, they actually had limited sort of ability to take on new space because of traditional leases. But that's starting to change in the last sort of year or two, and we expect to see things continue to change going forward. In turn, right now, the continued interest, I think, coupled with sort of revised workplace strategies, has caused significant growth. Certainly in 2022, we saw that, and it's still feeding through into 2023. And there are very positive signs for sort of future direction of the flexible workspace market in Singapore. While at a state level, it's not as large as maybe some of the other markets, such as Hong Kong. It is performing significantly better, with continued, as I say, interest and growth expected. By 2025, we would expect somewhere in the region of 3.5 million square feet of new interest being seen on an annual basis. What that means in transactions can vary anywhere to sort of 10 to 20% of that, but still it's very healthy new growth that we expect to see kind of going forward. If we move on to the next stage, or the next slide. So I think while APAC as a whole has sort of bounced back relatively positively in regard to return to work, there are still challenges, and they remain. And certainly it comes from occupiers still realigning their workspace strategies to their business needs and trying to predict the future, which remains quite a challenging sort of aspect. And we conducted some research with ULI, the Urban Land Institute, in the first half of this year to try and identify what some of those challenges were, ultimately with the aim of helping providers of space sort of better understand their occupiers' requirements and hopefully ultimately meet those needs. Within Asia Pacific, it's probably unsurprising that cost came as the number one challenge, and providing detail, I think, not just on the cost, but also the benefits that flexible space brings through things like increased utilization, reduced space, and therefore the impact on lower overall costs is now more critical than ever. It's still a very hard thing to compare for most businesses what flex costs versus their traditional leasing options. We've just been working with a very large client who was able to finally understand a like-for-like delivery would save them, a flexible like-for-like delivery would save them 26% over the next 3 years compared to their traditional leasing. And that was with only a slight decrease in headcount across their business, around 4%, and actually an increase in the number of spaces that they would be able to utilize. So statistical data on cost is starting to come out, and I think will only help the industry going forward. Measurement of utilization of the office, which is, I think, now being used as a bit of a stopgap measure to try and show productivity, is equally important. Easy to use utilization data with insight, not just on how that occupiers and their employees are utilizing space, but how others within the space are utilizing it. Being able to benchmark their performance is really something that occupiers are looking for right now, and is relatively easy to deliver. And finally, sustainability, a topic that I think receives mixed reviews, or mixed focus at least, is expected to become more important over time. In the UK, large corporates consistently now look for space that can not only deliver, on their usage, sort of data on their usage, but also around things like embodied carbon. And I think while this trend is slower to take up across APAC, the research showed that in the earlier part of this year, at least, that it's the third most important factor in the midterm, sort of the next 5 years to develop. So something for operators, hopefully, and landlords to really start working towards. So if we move to the next slide, if we go back to sort of looking specifically at Singapore, and this is some data that we've taken from CoWork Intel, I think it shows that despite the challenges that we do know exist in the market, there, and the positivity that we've talked about, the rates that we've seen within the flexible space have stayed relatively stable over the last sort of 3 to 4, 5 years. I think, and that's on the back of that sort of slowly strengthening demand and slowly strengthening transaction volumes that we sort of earlier talked about. Increasing competition from the traditional sector, I think, has meant in recent months that at the very sort of highest end of the market, we are starting to see a slight softening. A similar trend, but far less extreme than we see in Hong Kong or even in New York, where significant challenges from the traditional real estate sector are really starting to impact the flexible workspace sectors in those cities. Something that I think we as an industry need to keep an eye on within Singapore. Thankfully, at present, those declines aren't widespread. And from what we can see, there are segments that are highlighted by the CoWork Intel data, such as the mid-range area of the market, where the sort of the average has been able to be maintained, albeit I think most occupiers, speaking to them, would like to see rate increases based on increasing costs within their businesses. But we know in a competitive market that can be quite a challenging activity. So again, something that's very useful to try and understand and benchmark your own business against. If we move on to the final slide from my section, I think while not as extreme as in a market like Hong Kong, location in Singapore plays a very significant role in establishing rates. And while rates at an average level, as we saw on the last slide, have stayed relatively stable despite those tough market conditions, there is limited growth happening in certain areas, helping to sort of support the operational cost increases that we are seeing. Equally, in certain areas, particularly sort of less central locations, we've started to see some declines in recent months. So being able to look at that granularity, at least from our perspective, and we hope you'd agree, takes data from sort of being a nice to have to help contextualize broader market trends, as we saw in the last slide, to something that is very specific to your business, and helps you to start making those more informed decisions. So I'm now going to hand over to Lawrence to talk through the platform and exactly what it shows in Singapore. But while we do that, we wanted to run just a quick poll, really, to ask you, what sort of market data do you feel adds the most value to your business? So if you're able to respond as we go through and transition across to Lawrence, that would be brilliant. The options that we've got are sort of optimizing performance of existing locations, identifying expansion opportunities, supporting that investment and financing sort of business case, in landlord negotiations, something that we've started to see a little bit creeping in when it comes to sort of customer acquisition and retention, being able to support your business case or your pricing, or all of the above. So what we're seeing is very clear there, which is a responsive in terms of how it's being used within the response from this session is primarily in supporting sort of investment and financing decisions, something that we are seeing increasingly become popular globally. Certainly a sort of investment into real estate, certainly commercial real estate, is becoming more challenging. Those investors are looking for more clarity and third-party verification. And then also, you've mentioned that sort of customer acquisition and retention is something that's important. And again, when we speak to our occupiers, we know that they're expecting relatively good deals, shall we say, in the market. Certainly if they've come from the traditional sector, where we know many landlords are becoming more flexible and more willing to offer a deal at the moment. And therefore being able to show a potential customer that your rates or your product is in line with market, or you're increasing your rates again in line with market, can really sort of help ease those conversations. Right, So I'm going to pass over to Lawrence now, who will take you both, or take you all, I should say, through the Cowork Intel platform. I'll hang around, so if there's any questions about what we've sort of talked about here, happy to discuss them at the end of the call, as Dominic mentioned. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, James. Well, firstly, can I say that it's great to be here in Singapore. And I'm here for the course of this week, and I look forward to meeting many of you who have joined in on the webinar over the course of this whole week. Now, from Instant's deep involvement into the flex market, what we're really finding is that there is a growing appetite for more and more transparency in terms of what's happening on the ground and how that market is changing. And given the strength of Instant's connections and the breadth of expertise that we have in the market, we consider ourselves to be the best placed company to help the flex workspace market grow and drive the industry forwards by providing valuable data to operators across the globe, especially in mature and competitive markets like here in Singapore. And while the competition in the market is intensifying and surging demand, like in Singapore, for flexible workspace makes the industry full of opportunity, what it does require is decrypting a complex market, which is often quite opaque, in order to make informed, data-driven decisions. So what did we do about it? Well, November last year, just over 12 months ago, Instant invested into Cowork Intel. And since then, we've made significant developments into the platform. One of the main ones being that we've ingested all of the global Instant transactional data all the way back from 2015 through to today. And the platform provides valuable cleansed, aggregated, and anonymized data, largely around pricing, demand, and increasingly so occupancy levels, allowing the market, so that's operators and landlords, to make informed decisions on their businesses. And with the market, with the data that we currently have here in Cowork Intel, it is already the most comprehensive data and insights platform for the market. And operators have already been able to establish 5% or more profitability and save a significant amount of time from using processes such as mystery shopping. The Cowork Intel platform gives you the knowledge to optimize rates, maximize occupancy, and underpin growth opportunities into new markets. And our overall ambition and vision with this platform is to help create a smarter working world for everyone. So again, one other quick poll that we would like to launch before I give a quick demo of the platform. If we could just open up this, is data-wise, what data do you commonly use or look to use when assessing one of your existing sites, or perhaps even selecting new assets for expansion? You can select multiple answers on this particular poll. So is it a case of demand or occupancy data, desk transacted rate data, square foot and square meter transacted rate data, competitor profiles, or do you do a simple search on Google? Traditional real estate costs you look into, OPEX costs, or anything else. So we're getting some really interesting responses to this poll, with a number of people selecting, a large proportion of people are already selecting demand data. They like to assess occupancy data. Competitor profiles and traditional real estate costs seem to me the most prevalent, but it also seems as though a lot of you who are joining the webinar like to do what looks as though it's quite a lot of due diligence and research into a number of different areas. So it's great to see so much interest coming from the market in terms of the sheer volume of data that you'd like to use in order to underpin those decisions. So thank you for your input there. So just before I launch, and we can end up that poll now. So before I launch and give a quick demo of the platform, just wanted to set the scene in terms of Cowork Intel to make it really crystal clear for those of you who are joining this webinar today in terms of what we're doing. So over the course of the next 6 months, so essentially from today, for the next 6 months onwards, we're going to be running a pilot for all Singapore-based operators, both large and small, and we're giving these operators an exciting opportunity to contribute their data into the platform, and in return grant them access to the platform's data, which is then presented in a cleansed, aggregated, and anonymized format. And whilst we're running that pilot, I'm pleased to confirm that there will be no associated cost to operators who contribute their data, and any data that is contributed will be sent directly to the Co-work Intel business and not with Instant. And once it has been sent over, we have a team in Co-work Intel that cleanse, aggregate, and anonymize the data, and then it will become visible within the platform. So during that 6-month period, we're going to be engaging with as many operators as we can, so that we can build a really comprehensive picture initially of pricing, occupancy, and demand levels across Singapore. And our initial aim, a target, is to get to around 30% representation of the market. We also commit during that time to significantly invest to improve the platform during that time, so that it provides even further value during that time as well. The key improvements that we're looking to make initially over the next 6 months are twofold. One is around getting better breadth and depth of data across Singapore, and secondly, to provide valuable insights and reports which will be layered on top of the data. And we'll also be taking on board some really valuable feedback from each of you, so that we can continue to make continuous improvements to the platform. Now, we've already onboarded a number of operators here in Singapore onto the platform, and it would be great to have all of you who are on this webinar, as well as the rest of the market, onto the pilot. We've actually already been running a pilot in key hubs across the UK. We've been able to build up a really comprehensive picture of what is happening on the ground across key districts and submarkets in terms of occupancy, pricing, and demand levels. And we've had some brilliant feedback on the market so far, with operators saying that they've been able to use our data to benchmark, adjust their pricing to improve their occupancy across their sites, and a number of operators are actually using the platform to assess new markets to enter into. So if I share my screen now, and I will jump into the Co-work Intel platform. Hopefully you can see it now. So what we've got here is that this is what you'll first be greeted with from the moment that you log in and have access. And before I go through these data points, it's one thing for me to be absolutely clear in terms of how we make all of this data aggregated and anonymized. We ensure that we have 4 or more contributing operators, i.e. operators who are sharing data into the platform, which is then aggregated and anonymized before it can then become visible. So what we've got here is a platform where at the top you're able to very quickly and easily manipulate and slice and dice the data in any which way you suit best. So you can see all of the city districts. You'll be able to select there, the date range and the competitor profiles, for example. Now, what we've highlighted at the top are the key metrics. First of all, in terms of the desk pricing. So the average achieved rate per month across the whole of Singapore on a monthly basis for the last month was 668 Singapore dollars, and that represents a 6% increase on last month. And the demand levels we've had a 4% increase on the previous month, and I'll talk a bit more in detail in terms of that demand index shortly. Now, going back to the point that I mentioned earlier on around the data, we can only surface the data when we have enough operators who are sharing their data with us. So, for example, in Singapore, at the moment, as things currently stand, we don't have that level of granularity to be able to form a view. But it took us around 1 month in the UK across key hubs to be able to get to the stage where we've been able to not only provide that data on a city-wide basis, but actually on a sub-market and district level basis as well. So we hope to be able to do the same here in Singapore. And what we've got here is a view of a really good sample size, actually, of over 212 sites, all dotted across Singapore, where you can see, you can click on any of these links, and each of them relate to a specific a site where an operator is based, where we have got transactional data. That data, all of the data that you're seeing in front of you so far, is data that's based upon instant transactions, as well as a handful of operators who are in Singapore now contributing their data. And what we can tell from that is, the following: the achieved rate per desk, we've broken it down into high-end, mid-range, and economical. So for the high end, that would be the top 40% of providers in the market. The mid-range is the middle 30%, and the economical is the bottom 30%. So depending upon you as an operator, you see where yourself fits, you'll be able to quickly and easily see how you're comparing to the market. Now, the other great thing about the platform is that once you've been able to contribute your data, there will be a line for each of your sites, so that immediately you'll be able to assess how you're comparing from a pricing point of view versus your immediate peers in the industry. And you can, as I say, you can modify that data based upon the location, competitor types, or the brand tier. And then what we've done is we've been able to extrapolate that same level of data out on a square meter basis. Now we're going to change that to square feet, because we understand in Singapore that's how you view the market size. And then from an achieved rate per workstation basis, we're getting really great feedback on this chart, because apparently a lot of operators are saying it's very, very useful for renewals, because depending upon the requirement type that they're serving in the market, i.e. 1 to 2 desks or 3 to 9 desks, or perhaps even bigger, although most of the interest that we're seeing from the market here in Singapore tends to be at the lower requirement size. You can see how to adjust your pricing, both based upon the term length, but also what has actually been achieved in the market as well. We also have a view on where, in terms of the number of deals, in terms of the size of those deals have been done. Now, interestingly, most of the deals that get done in the market, looks as though around 40% are the 1 to 2 desk size, although it looks as though it has decreased slightly over the last 12 or so months, and a slight increase in slightly larger requirements of 3 to 9. But you can see here that the vast majority of transactions is at the lower requirement size. And interestingly, if we look at the deal profile by initial contract length, fewer deals are now done for under 3 months, and a greater proportion of the deals are being now done between 7 to 12 months, which may indicate a changing appetite from potential occupiers in terms of their view on utilizing Flex as well. Now, the next graph can actually be really useful from a marketing point of view, because based upon specific locations across Singapore, it's going to attract different types of demographics of occupiers, and therefore you'll be able to then adjust your marketing strategy to make sure that you're attracting the most appropriate types of clientele. A demand picture, you can see the demand picture is quite an interesting one, because it really skyrocketed from, where are we, September or 2021, so around 2 years ago, and it hit a bit of a peak in, where are we, September of last year, decreased slightly, but it's beginning to pick up again now, and this is all based upon the number of inquiries that is being received on the market. We then extrapolated that same data out in terms of the requirement size, and also in terms of the number of desks as well. Now, interestingly, it looks as though even there seems to be quite a lot of interest from the larger requirement size of desks, and I wonder if some of those are actually ending up moving into landlord-owned offices. But interesting to see there's quite a lot of demand coming through there. And then in terms of the hotspots across Singapore, what we're seeing is that these locations are the ones where there is significant demand, but insignificant supply. So Suntec City, Downtown Core, Tanjong Pagar are the top 3 areas in Singapore where we're seeing that as a bit of a trend at the moment. And in terms of where our data is coming from, probably no surprise that Regis represents, the largest market share, and with as well as Justco, a number of other key providers in the market like corporate serviced offices and WeWork, as well as a really large, smaller long tail of providers out in the market as well. So hopefully that gives everybody here today a bit of a view on the on what we're seeing take place here in the market. And yeah, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that people may have. We just see if any have come through yet. Let me have a look. Maybe give it a minute or so, just in case people are typing in the questions at present. Oh, here we go. Okay, so somebody has just asked, how do operators decide on new expansion sites in the market? It's a great question, and actually one of the most common bits of feedback that we're seeing from the market on our platform is that they're utilizing our platform, if you like, to assess new markets. And how they're doing it is that they can take a view on the supply, i.e. what is the potential competition. They can then assess the demand to get an indication that if they were to open up a site in that particular location, where is the demand coming from, how much demand is there, but also pricing. So they can build in their own margins based upon the size of the space. And also where we've been able to establish the data views on occupancy. And they're utilizing that data in conjunction with additional data points to get a really good indication of whether or not they should or shouldn't be opening up a new location. James, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that at all. No,
I don't think so. Yeah, spot on.
Okay. And then another question that's just come through: how can Instant ensure that the data that's being sent over is kept confidential? It's a great question, and it's one that's come up a number of times in a lot of the meetings that we have. And this is something that we take incredibly seriously. And there are a few measures that we've got in place. First of all, any data that is shared with Co-work Intel is purely shared for the purposes of building up a more comprehensive view of what's going on in the market, and the data is kept within Co-work Intel. It's never made available in its raw format to James or I or anyone else in Instant, or our shareholders for that matter. The data is transferred securely, either via a property management system or operating system, where we have a direct integration with many of the key PMS systems. In fact, we're developing new ones with CRM systems like Salesforce at the moment, for example. But some operators are also opting to share their data via an Excel spreadsheet, where they can securely upload the spreadsheet, and it's transferred directly to the data science team in Co-work Intel. Then they do their magic in terms of cleansing, aggregating, and anonymizing that data. We also have an agreement that we have in place with every single operator, which makes it crystal clear that our pledge as part of that process is to ensure that data is kept securely in Co-work Intel. Okay, and the next question. We're seeing a very competitive market right now. So likewise, and how would Co-work Intel Instant Market Insights help operators practically? Maybe James, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think it depends on sort of where you are in the phase of your business. Let's take the example if you have an existing asset or existing flexible workspace in the market already. So in that situation, the main sort of areas where I would say this helps is around sort of benchmarking. So being able to understand what your competitive set is charging, what the occupancy levels are. I think personally, I'm coming from using data in this sort of way in other industries, are vital in giving you confidence when you're deciding, are you going to be more aggressive or are you going to hold your ground when it comes to your existing space? Equally, if you're looking at demand volumes, it's a really good indicator of, are you seeing your fair share of demand? And what that can allow you to do is understand, are your marketing channels working to the extent or as well as they can be? Is there something else that the sales teams could be doing? So if you are seeing fair share of demand, but you're not seeing the transactions come through, then an indication there that maybe there's something in the space or there's something with the sales teams that maybe that aren't as strong as it could be. So for me, it gives you the confidence to be able to start making some of those decisions with a data sort of based background. And for me, that in a tough market is critical, really. Yeah.
I completely agree, and we're getting some brilliant case studies come through now from operators who are using the platform, and one of which is probably worth highlighting. We had an operator who said that they wanted to increase their occupancy, but they were quite nervous about how to change their pricing across their existing sites. So what they did is they had access to the platform, they shared their data, they could see actually compared to their immediate peers, that they were actually overpricing the market slightly. They made an actual decrease to their pricing strategy, and it increased their occupancy significantly. So either we've got operators that are actually being able to uplift their pricing because they're underplaying it versus the market, or actually they're in some cases they're a bit too toppy in terms of that pricing, and therefore they've been able to increase their occupancy accordingly. So yeah. And then another question that's come through is, can operators see the market data for other countries for expansion purposes? Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing operators based in the UK that show no interest here in Singapore. They've used our data to help justify investment decisions. Operators based here in Singapore look into KL and Bangkok and elsewhere across Southeast Asia and further afield. And operators even over in the US, many of the big enterprise ones, who are, as part of their expansion strategies, they want data over in across the whole of APAC. So yeah, absolutely, and we're more than happy to provide that as well. Okay, well, I think that brings everything to wrap. Thank you to all of you who have joined in on today's webinar. Thank you for being involved in the poll, and also for asking some brilliant questions. Dominic, James, and I are going to be on hand. After this, should you have any further questions about anything that we've talked about. And in the case of Dominic and I, we're around, or Dominic's here permanently, but I'm around for the whole of this week and look forward to meeting with many of you and answering any further questions you may have as well. Thank you.
Thanks for the time. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.